All right, so welcome to the plant world. So we've worked our way through several other topics at this point, and we've talked about the protists. And what I want you to remember really about that group is that they laid the evolutionary foundation for lots of other groups. They're the evolutionary foundation for fungi, for plants, for animals, etc. So now we want to look at the plants and look at their evolutionary history and what diversity do we see out there in the plant world. This is often an area that people kind of gloss over. They go, oh, I don't really like plants. I'm not too into botany and it's not that exciting. But think about it. Without plants, we're dead. They're going to be okay if we disappear. But if plants disappear, we're dead. We have no food, we have no oxygen, we lose significant medical cures, resources. We are just so dependent upon this group that we should have more awareness and really more appreciation of them to try to increase the plant diversity and stability on this planet. But what we want to do is take a look at the evolutionary journey of the plant world. And to do that, we have to go back hundreds of millions of years. About 450 million years ago, it's estimated that this slimy green algae evolves to life on land. So green algae is the ancestor to the land plants. So again, about 450 million years ago is when we see evidence that life is evolving out of the aquatic ecosystem and adapting to terrestrial existence. Some of the earliest things on land were fungi, because it's a combination of, well, fungus, lichens, things like that, because it's a combination of the protists and the fungus. But not too long after that, we see the evolution of plants making their way onto land. Whole new world, uncharted territory. And in order to do this, plants, or green algae evolving into plants, had to overcome some major challenges to life on land. So I want you to take a minute, pause the video, and write down, what do you think are the top 3 challenges if your species existence was always aquatic? What would the top 3 challenges be to evolve to life on land? What hurdles do you have to overcome? Because plants were able to do this. Animals had to deal with the same issues. Okay, so pause the video, write down 3 challenges, and then we'll take a look at those 3 challenges here. Okay, so you're back? All right. So in no particular order, but here are 3 of the major challenges when you go from aquatic existence to terrestrial existence. Okay, so there might be a lack of or a limited water supply if you're evolving to terrestrial existence. How do you get water? Water is essential for life, for photosynthesis. If you're living in the water, no big deal, easy. It's there, it's everywhere. But on land, this becomes a challenge. And what we'll see is plants evolved adaptations to deal with this. Think about how plants live in the desert. They survive in that desert environment. They're capable of doing it. Okay, so there's one. Here's another challenge. Gravity may not seem like a big deal. If you're floating around in water for your evolutionary existence, and now all of a sudden you go on to land, oh, I have to support my body weight. How do I grow to be really big and tall if I don't have structural changes to my body to enable me to grow tall? So gravity is a huge issue. And then ultraviolet radiation. In water, the ultraviolet radiation is diffused because of the water. It kind of dilutes it and reduces it. On land, I have no sun exposure or no solar block from UV radiation. So again, if I'm going to survive on land, my species better evolve adaptations to this. Other challenges, there's lack of nutrients in the soil or the environment. So how do you obtain those nutrients if you're now living on land? And diversity of predators. Who knows what's going to be out there trying to eat you if you evolve to this land-based environment. And again, you guys could keep listing out more and more and more. There's lots of different challenges to life on land. Plants figured this out. They evolved and found ways to, I don't want to say counteract, but ways to adapt in spite of those challenges. And we have plants all over this planet. But what we're going to see is a progressive evolution. Tackle one problem, evolve to tackle the next problem, evolve to tackle the next problem. It doesn't all happen at first. So it's like plant version 2.0, plant version 3.0. It's kind of like an iPhone. We're on what, version 10, 11, 12, whatever. Why couldn't they get all these things figured out in the very first version? Because there's new challenges that keep coming up that have to be figured out. So with evolution, the way this stuff's going to work is that there has to be a greater benefit than a consequence to an evolutionary event, to change, to evolving to this environment. So if you're going to evolve to a terrestrial environment, you better have more benefits than negatives. There are some challenges, but what we want to look at now, what are the major benefits to life on land? Okay, and these obviously made it worthwhile, so to speak, for plants to evolve to land. So make sure I get this right. All right, so plenty of carbon dioxide in that environment. If you're living on land, hey, we got plenty of CO2 available for you. There is no concern about the amount of carbon dioxide available. So that does give you a benefit that, okay, I don't have to worry about carbon dioxide levels if I'm going to live on land. So the exposure, let me get that increased. The exposure to sunlight is kind of that double-edged sword. Sunlight does carry UV radiation, but you have greater wavelengths of light, making photosynthesis much more effective when you can capture a fuller spectrum of sunlight on land versus losing some of that sunlight when you're in the water. Okay, so we got those. For the early plants, limited competition. Hey, there's nobody else out there. I don't have to do a whole lot to be number one, to be the best, to be the most adaptable species, if there's no other species out there that I'm competing against. So huge advantage. You go into an environment with limited competition, it's much easier to be successful. Same thing with the predators. They're going to be pretty limited when you're evolving into a new environment. There's probably not going to be a lot of predators out there. And then symbiotic relationships with other, I'm just going to say groups, because we will see plants evolving symbiosis with fungi, with bacteria, with protists, with animals, etc. Those symbiotic relationships, and in most cases, the beneficial ones, mutualism, gave plants a huge advantage and enabled them to be successful. And what we'll see is the plants that really could kind of capitalize on those symbiotic relationships, they're the ones who became more successful than the other plant groups that couldn't develop those relationships. So in the big picture, I want to put a term in here. Let me get another little box that I want you guys, I'm going to put a little hashtag. We'll make it a big hashtag, not a little hashtag. And we're going to make it a red hashtag. All right. Pioneer species. It's a big term for you to lock into the memory banks and hold on to long term. Keep this one long term, guys. Don't just blanket for this unit or this course. Oh. Okay, the basic concept behind a pioneer species. It is the first species to establish a community, ecosystem, whatever we want to call it. So as algae moved out onto land, they were pioneers. Or as algae evolved to life on land and evolved into the plants, they became pioneer species. They helped set the stage for life on land and give other species a chance to then follow. So that's what pioneers do. They're trailblazers, or they're first ones out there, giving other species an easier path to follow. So the negative of being a pioneer species, usually the ones that follow you outcompete you and kick you out. And then you have to move on to a new community. We'll talk more about that when we get to ecology. Okay, but here's the big picture of plant classification. We're not going to dive too deep into it because classification is shifting and adjusting, but I want you to be able to visually see kind of what the big picture looks like here. Okay, so again, kind of here's our big overview of plants. Things to remember. Oh, let me get my little pen out. The ancestral algae, green algae, gave rise to the land plants. And when we start looking at these groups, the charophytes, this group here, is considered a sister clade to the land plants. So this is kind of the sister to all the land plants, because here's starting here, keep my line straight, going that way. Those are the land plants. So these are grouped under the Streptophyta. Don't get hung up on that. We're going to look at plants as a kingdom plantae, and then what we'll do is we'll break it down into the subcategories, the bryophytes, tracheophytes, euphylophytes, and then the seed plants. This is kind of our evolutionary progression, and then eventually to angiosperms. And remember, this point of evolution roughly here, where it gave rise to the earliest plants, land plants, that's going back about 450 million years ago. All right, let me remember, million years, MY, supposed to say MYA. Okay, so million years ago. So, all right, so I'm going to pause here. This is going to be our first part. Pick up the second part, and then we're going to start talking about kind of big features that we see across the land plants, different adaptations, and then we'll start diving into the different plant groups.